This is Oozora Subaru, and in my mind, she is the absolute greatest VTuber of all time, which, as a self-proclaimed VTuber connoisseur, is not something I say lightly. But I didn't always used to think that. In fact, there was a time I used to find Subaru actually kinda annoying. So how does a person go from seriously disliking someone 1 minute, to confessing their love for them in a video in the next? Well, much like an anime, the answer is kinda complicated. My journey from dislike to love is a long one, and one that takes a lot of heart, personality, drama, and plot twists. But most of all, it takes a crap ton of gap mowing. This is the story of how I fell in love with Oozora Subaru. It all started over a year ago now when I learned about VTubers for the very first time. As I went about falling down the Hololive rabbit hole, I came across something different. At this point in my journey, I still had my innocence and naively underestimated the true insanity that was Hololive. I mean, I still believed Yago and thought Hololive was an idol company, for goodness sake. The very first time I was introduced to Subaru was from a video that was a compilation of her cursed ASMR. And while now I can truly appreciate all that is Subaru's magnificent ASMR, my less experienced self was not quite as enthusiastic. Okay, so things weren't off to the greatest of starts already between me and Subaru. But so what? Right now you're probably thinking it wasn't really that big of a deal, and you'd be right. If it weren't for the fact that right around then was when I also happened to learn about the Peko-Suba War. Now, those who have already seen my videos before could probably already have guessed why that would be a bad thing. But for those uninitiated, I am a bit of a die-hard Pekora fan. So die-hard, in fact, for school I made a Pekora propaganda project to present to my entire class. I followed Pekora's adventures religiously and was as loyal as they get. So needless to say, I was very invested in this war and wanted Pekora to show this fool the true might of Usada Kensetsu. I wanted Pekora to destroy her so bad she would never think of messing with the war criminal rabbit ever again. Subaru was the enemy, and Usagis don't discriminate. If you became an enemy of Pekora, you became the enemy of everyone. But that all changed the moment I found out about one game Subaru had been playing. One game that was so extreme and powerful, I couldn't help but watch, even if it meant I had to watch Subaru. The one game that single-handedly set me on a path of enlightenment and self-discovery. The game that would eventually lead me to liking and even falling in love with Subaru. That game was called Sausage Legends. Who could have guessed a game so absolutely ridiculous and stupid could be so fun and entertaining in the hands of Subaru? Sausage Legends brings out the absolute best in Subaru. Subaru's Sausage Legends streams are so ridiculously hilarious and entertaining. I can't help but audibly laugh, and I never do that. I'm the kind of person who can sit through hours of funny content without laughing. Whether it be the more common try not to laugh videos, or just actually hilarious content in general. But there I was, busting up laughing, because of Subaru of all people. I tried to stop and calm myself, but I just couldn't do it. Subaru's reactions and comments were just so freaking priceless, I couldn't stop. And this was the start of my Subaru enlightenment. Subaru had been a VTuber for over 3 years by this point. And what that meant was there is no shortage of Subaru clips. With my mind finally open to the idea, I decided to dive headfirst into the plethora of Subaru clips. In the span of about a month, I had practically caught up with every big thing Subaru had been involved in. I had watched so many of her clips, there wasn't much Subaru left. Normally, this would be the end of the story. I'd continue watching clips of hers as they would appear, but around this time is when I'd usually repeat the whole process of discovery and mass benching with another girl. But something was different this time. I don't know if it was something about Subaru, a certain clip or event that was going on in the community at the time, or even the fact that around that time is when I first started messing around with the idea in my head of making VTuber videos. But whatever it was something special. It was something I had never experienced before, and ultimately would be the drive that would make me fall in love with Subaru. If I were to compare my experience up until now to a visual novel, this would have been the moment where my route was firmly chosen, and there was no going back. All that came before this was when my route was undecided. I was in the trial phase where I got introduced to all the girls and characters, but that stopped now. This was the moment where one choice changed the entire rest of the game for me. I was on the Subaru route, whether I liked it or not. and as a result, I got to enjoy a whole new side of her I never even knew existed before. As I dove further and further into everything Subaru, I was never able to see her the same way again. Before, Subaru had always seemed bubbly and playful as she always had been, but now I was able to see past that. As I learned about her past, something struck a chord with me. A chord that hadn't been played in a very long time. I have always been a very antisocial person due to a multitude of personal and familial circumstances, but I always wanted to be someone who can make others smile. Ever since I was little, I dreamed of being the person you would want to hang out with when you were having a bad day because they just always seemed to know how to make you laugh. No matter how bad things seem to get, they'd always be there trying to make the best of any situation, whether it be by cracking a few bad jokes or by just being there. What I wanted to be was, well, Subaru. Subaru always tries her absolute hardest to make the best out of any situation. She's always cheerful and just seems to know how to make others smile. Subaru is incredibly playful and always seems to be just trying to have a good time. Subaru is just always there, willing to talk to anybody, and she's such an honest person. She has one of the biggest hearts I have ever seen. She is always doing things for others, whether it be as simple as asking just how someone's doing, or it be incredibly selfless and thoughtful. One perfect example of this is Subaru is always trying to make English subtitles for overseas fans so they don't feel excluded during her talk streams, even though it could take her hours to do and she's very self-conscious of it. And of course, how could I make a video about Subaru without mentioning one of her greatest and most defining qualities? Her gap moe! Subaru is the absolute greatest tomboy of all time. I mean, I don't even know where to start. She is just so freaking playful and strong, and we finally get to see those few moments of her showing her true feminine side. It just drives me freaking nuts! In Subaru wants, she really can turn into a swan, and nothing can quite compete with the level of gap moe Subaru possesses. With that level of gap moe, she could probably even compete with Thanos himself. I could go on and on about how much I love Subaru for an eternity, but unfortunately we don't have that kind of time. So instead, I'll finish off my story and finally answer the question of how I fell in love with Subaru. Well, everything I mentioned up until this point has been a big factor. One of the biggest reasons why I am truly in love with Subaru is the fact that she saved my life. By just being herself, Subaru has managed to get me through some of the roughest points in my life. By nature, I am extremely negative and nihilistic. But pair that up with an anxiety disorder that practically cripples me seemingly at random, smack dab in the midst of a pandemic where I'm constantly reminded every day that I have no true friends or loved ones, plus having a mentally abusive mother, all while having to face the reality that I failed at achieving the dream I had since I was 10 of being a YouTuber. And now I need to start getting a job and planning to go to college, or else my fear of ending up like my older son's successful sister who still lives with her parents will come true. No biggie. But in reality, those are some of the darkest months of my life. And even thinking about it now pains me a bit. The only thing that got me through it was VTubers, but more specifically Subaru. At one point, I had practically given up on the world. Everything seemed to just be all bad. No matter where I looked, I only saw constant suffering. But then I found Subaru. One tomboy anime girl who, amidst all the pain in my life, gave me hope. Subaru was a bright light in my life when I was lost and complete in utter darkness. Subaru would always make me smile. She'd make jokes, play around with her friends, an audience, play games, and just be a completely genuine and nice person. I owe Subaru my life. Even now, I often watch Subaru when I'm feeling down, or just want to have a good time. In all seriousness, I do genuinely love Subaru. She has done more for me than I could ever even comprehend. But I know she'll never feel the same, let alone even know who I am. And I have come to accept that. I know you probably heard a million horror stories of guys falling in love with streamers, donating all they own to them, getting creepy and stalk creep because they feel entitled to reciprocated feelings, etc. But don't worry about me, I won't go down that path. Believe me or not, I do have a capable brain that can use basic restraint. I'm sure I'll eventually move on, maybe even look back on this moment and laugh. But for right now, just this second, this was how I fell in love with Oozora Subaru.